Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. And you actually sound pretty good too. Howdy.
Thanks. So I just wanted to, so I, s- uh, if you, as my comment said, I saw your video about, it was you were talking about Nancy Pelosi and you said a bunch of things about Republicans. I am just for your information, I am a Republican. I'm I'm actually a neoconservative, which is rare these days, but
A
I
little bit,
just
yeah.
I s- I was I very much strongly disagreed with the things you said um, about. I mean, I know like you can be edgy and stuff, but I'm so I don't know how much of it was like intentionally hyperbolic, but
Oh,
I
tell
just
me,
wanted to.
tell me what I said that you took issue with. I'm afraid that not too much in that video was hyperbolic. I was pretty sincere about what I said. But what did I say that you took issue with?
Okay, well, you did say that pretty much all Republicans are like subhuman, like really like extremely stupid, evil, and all that stuff. Um,
I want to be clear. I think I distinguished this in the video. If not, that's a mistake on my part, unfortunately. But when I say that, I mean the Republican establishment, the politicians and such. I only think that of maybe a fraction of Republican voters, which is still millions of people. Don't get me wrong. Um, but not all Republicans. There are Republican voters who I know and love, personally, even if I disagree with them. I do think that pretty much entirely about Republican politicians, though.
okay, yeah, I still very strongly disagree with the when you talk about the Republican establishment. I know that you're very far left, and so we're not going to really agree on much there. But I do think the statements you said were took it way too like were beyond like reasonable. Um,
Sure, such as what?
so you think that they all so well, we can talk about like you seem to think they're all racist and stuff, and like your average like well let me clarify first. So me personally, I'm you know I'm more of more of an establishment conservative. I'm not a fan of Trump at all. I very much dislike him.
Mhm.
I'm against like this. I will agree that like the Republican Party right now is in a definitely in a bad spot. There's with all the like crazy populism and conspiracy theories and stuff, but like the mainstream, um, the mainstream wing of the party, like I don't see merit to the idea that they, that they're all these like racist and like evil and the things that you said.
Well, I suppose it would largely depend on our definitions of these words, right? So, when it comes to the racism allegation, I don't think every Republican is actively racist in the sense that they deliberately, cognitively believe that black or non white people are inferior. I think a lot of them do feel that way. Not all of them. I don't even know if it's a majority of them, but a significant number of them. It's not that unlikely, you know. The idea that black people are inherently inferior was the mainstream conservative position half a century ago. A lot of the people who are marching against civil rights back then are alive today and voting. So the idea that like as soon as the Civil Rights Act was passed, like snap of the fingers and then it's gone, like that seems unlikely. You know, there were probably quite a few like aggressive, active racist types. Um, and I'd say the rest of them are passively racist in the sense that even if they don't actively believe in white superiority, they still enable it through sort of adjacent social systems.
So I think, um, I think, well, the I would definitely think that the conservative movement in general has, I mean, like, if you want to say that that during those times, like the civil rights, in the '60s and back then, if you want to say that those are conservatives, um, uh, the racist ones or whatever,
Mhm.
uh, I think it um it has the times have significantly changed to where I don't see that really as a problem. Like, I don't deny, or I don't see that being a problem within conservatism. Like, so I don't deny that, like, like things such as the Southern strategy and the I don't deny that, but I think um I don't really see it still being really where your average Republican and politician actually like believe, even if they were like personally, even if there were some that personally believed, still personally believe these things, uh it doesn't really, they're not in the way that matters, like in actual, like, the stuff they do, and when they're in power and stuff, their actual political views, they are not like, it's not even like similar, in my opinion, to how it was.
Well,
um
I agree that things have changed. I think they've been abstracted. You talk about the Southern strategy, and you have the whole Lee Atwater bit where you abstract racism. You don't say the N word anymore because you'll not be elected. But you can talk about, you know, voting representation, busing rights, schooling systems, or BLM in this case. And you have a consistent ideological trend where conservatives in this country have always stood against racial liberation. Um, but even keep in mind, even back 150 years ago, when we were talking about like the end of slavery, the beginning of Jim Crow, people whose open outward positions were that they thought blacks were inferior would still couch their political positions in the language of mutual beneficiality. So even people who were openly of the belief that this was a white man's country would still say, well, it is in the interest of the white and the black man that they be kept to their separate spaces and so on. So the language of paternalism has often been invoked as a way of sort of helping the racist pill go down. If you were a virulently racist person in Congress, you wouldn't be writing bills saying, we should legally recognize black people as subhuman or whatever. You would start putting forward bills or advocating for martial law in some areas to help deal with BLM protesters. Or you would try to push, say, Attorney General Barr to invoke sedition charges against BLM protesters. Or you would push for massive policing and say that the problem with crime in the black community is due to bad culture. Stuff like that, you would try to couch it in language like that. Um, the main conservative genocide target mostly seems to be trans people. They've quieted down on the race stuff for a little while, though it was only a couple weeks ago that Justice Jackson, or up to be Justice Jackson, was being accused of being a peddler of critical race theory, despite not being one, just because she's black, by some conservatives. So, it still comes up.
so I'm going to disagree that, like, that today the things that Republicans push for, and like their beliefs and their policies, I don't think anything that they're doing is like, whether they're coding I don't think there's nothing to even like code in any language, because I don't see any like merit to the idea that stuff that they're doing is actually like racist and stuff. So
Well,
that's
the whole response to BLM was pretty pointed. I don't have the best memory. I could bring up a bunch of examples if I dug through them, but if you want to focus on something that I have a stronger, like, immediate memory of, the trans stuff would be the most, like, immediate, like, evident thing to focus on, because that's what's happening right now in the news. Unfortunately, I don't have a great memory, so it's hard for me to hold all the old talking points in mind.
yeah. I mean, we can. I mean, I'm fine with talking about that, like, so I've heard you talk about Republicans in regards to trans issues, like that they basically want them all dead and everything.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't see that at all. If you could, like, how do they? I don't. I mean, you could say that they're like against transgenderism or whatever, but uh, or that they don't think it's like normal or whatever. But I don't see like how any like trans anything that's like supporting trans people dying or getting killed and
Well, they don't say that, of
the
course.
way. Well, yeah, but I know what you meant. I still don't see that.
The mainstream conservative position right now seems to be that trans people are mentally ill, and they're also predators who spread their mental illness to young people by grooming them. The language that's been used, not just by like online commentators, but like actual Republican politicians, alongside the literal hundreds of
There's so much denial here.
there we go. Alongside the literal hundreds of anti-trans, anti-gay bits of state legislation that have been going on in the past couple of months, the sentiment just seems to be one in which the very act of existing as trans is something which entails grooming, both of you and of the children you happen to be around. This rhetoric is nothing new, you know. The idea that, like, a group of queer people are degenerates and predators of children has historically been the line used to justify genocide against them. There are countries all around the world right now where you see that happening. It's a line that there are a number of, though I'd have to look to see the names exactly, countries in Africa for which that is a very common line, some of which were actually given instruction on that language by American fundamentalists who came over there and preached homophobia after it was rejected here in the States. It was what they did in Nazi Germany as well. So the idea, like that essentialization, I mean, this is a precursor to genocide. Not to mention, conservatives are generally pretty in favor of conversion therapy for trans people. Um, and they certainly seem to be enabling harassment against trans people in every socially available context.
I I can't see you know I see like I see some rhetoric, some of which I disagree with, think it goes too far and stuff like that. That's unhelpful and unnecessary, but I don't see any like merit to the idea that uh like that's something even remotely possible of happening, where like if Republicans got in power, we would see like
Why not?
like mass discrimination or killings or I I don't I there's just like, what policies are they pushing for that's going to like treat them like subhumans that should be killed off or whatever.
Well, so I'll tell you. The first step is enabling stochastic violence. See, it's easier to not pass the law and rather to get the craziest of your political party to go do it themselves. So just today we had a mass shooting in a grocery store by a person who was convinced by conservative great replacement rhetoric, something Tucker Carlson, the biggest conservative commentator, talks about constantly. And he killed 10 innocent people as a product of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's step number one. Because it's, there's nothing, there's no legal investment there. But then it goes further, you have all these state governments which are passing laws which make it incredibly difficult to live as a trans person, barring any kind of social or medical transition for underage people. There have been states considering denying the ability to medically transition to people who are even beyond the medical age of majority in that state. You have the prohibition of discussing these topics in school, another common precursor to genocide. If the Republicans took power in a federal sense, they could begin to codify these laws federally, basically treat transness like a social contagion and legislate against it as such. And then I imagine they would continue with the trend they're holding currently, which is the prosecution of parents of trans children. And once you have all that done, you've effectively made being trans illegal. I mean, you've essentially discriminated against it in the greatest capacity you can within the bounds of our democracy. But Republicans don't believe in democracy. They're going to suspend it if they can. And as a product of that, we can assume that they're going to go far beyond what you might expect, the existing legal framework to allow.
So yeah, the idea that like if Republicans got complete power and everything, just the idea that they would end up pushing for, or that we would end up in a direction of genocide for trans people. That just sounds, I can't see that happening at all. Like,
I would strongly encourage you. I apologize for interrupting. I just want to say I can't relay the historical facts for you, but I would encourage you to look up how dehumanization of groups takes place before a genocide. Because it always seems like it's so far off. Like, oh, you're just going to make killing them legal or whatever. Well, that's like step 50. But there are many steps before that. And whether you have like Jews in Nazi Germany or like the whole Tutsi, like Rwanda thing, like a million times over, any society that's had like some kind of targeted ethnic cleansing, there's a set of steps that are in place in a like the modern world that are pretty consistent, and it's happening over again. You disposition the population against a minority group. You blame society's problems on that minority group. You encourage stochastic terrorism against that minority group. You make it harder to live as that minority group. And then once that's happened, I mean, you're pretty much right at the cliff's edge.
So yeah, I understand that, but I just basically what I really disagree with is that that's what Republicans are doing. Like, I think you're far exaggerating how bad it is.
But everything I just said they would do, they're currently doing in state laws. I didn't make any of that up. Those are all things they're doing right now. Like all the things I talked about, like going after parents, trying to deny medical transit, like all that, it's already happening.
Well, yeah. I'm saying those things, like the things like that are, what I mean is, like, I don't think those are as, I mean, I know we're going to disagree, but I don't think they're as bad as you say, like that, the things that they're doing, like that's going to end up leading to a genocide or whatever. I mean, I know.
Why not?
If
it's consistent with the historical record, it's a pattern of dehumanization and state oppression, which tends to follow genocide. Arguably, what's happening right now is already a kind of genocide. Mass state suppression, definitely. Obviously there's a blurry line here, but in terms of the genocide that we tend to think of, I mean, this is absolutely a precursor, a necessary precursor. And we know that Republicans have no respect for the rule of democracy, so we don't... Oh, God, I'm bad. So we don't have any reason to believe they would be limited to sort of the constitutional framework when it comes to, furthering this.
Yeah, I want to talk about the democracy thing in a minute, but so do you think that how Republicans in regard to trans people right now, you think that's comparable to how it was before, like the Holocaust, where in regards to Nazis with Jews?
Yeah, same basic playbook. Obviously, with the Jews, it went to its greatest possible extent. I don't know. I don't think it's going to lead to like Auschwitz-Birkenau being built somewhere in Atlanta here in the States. But in terms of like the preceding lead up, yeah, it's the same basic pattern takes place in pretty much all these genocides.
Okay, well, yeah, I just don't see that, but we can move on to...
What would it take to convince you of that position, out of curiosity? Because you have all these like attacks on trans people for like seemingly no reason, and a lot of them are essentialist. Like, it's not just we disagree with the ideology, because that's what conservatives pretended at first, that they disagreed with the ideology. But it's pretty clear now that they're legislating against trans people, that the issue was with trans people, which is what it always was, because there's no such thing really as trans ideology. They exist, whether you ideologically acknowledge it or not. What would it take for you to think this is leading to something worse?
So that's one of my things I disagree with, is I don't really see them being essentialist. Whenever when I see them talking about it, yeah. So could you maybe expound on how they're being essentialist about it?
Yeah. The attacks against trans people in this respect are fundamentally essentialist because it's any acknowledgement of the group's existence, which is being referred to as grooming in schools. You know, you see like the Libs of TikTok Twitter account is calling people groomers for just acknowledging that trans people exist to their students, or the acknowledgement of like gay marriage or whatever. You know, when you have things like that, at that point we're not even talking about an ideological distinction. We're only talking about like whether children can even know, which clearly isn't an ideological front. It's a front to the very group of people that's being referred to. Moreover, all these statewide bills, these are attacks on trans people's like medical and social rights. You know, not ideology. Like if the issue is ideology, why go after like social transitioning for young people? What, you know, why go after like the medical availability of trans resources? It's you know, that's pretty essentially important stuff to them.
Well, yeah. So I think the issue there is that, you know, they just disagree. They just like disagree on with the basis that like that like, you know, for example, that children would like the child transitioning thing, you know, the hormone therapy. You know, they just
generally aren't
disagree.
given hormone therapy.
Or, yeah, excuse my ignorance. Sometimes I get the terms mixed up, but
That's okay. Just clarify.
Yeah. But yeah, they just think it's like they just disagree with like the idea that like with the children, like for that example, that, you know, that children transitioning is a thing, that is a good thing. Or like,
and why call trans or queer teachers groomers just for acknowledging the existence of gay or trans people? Because that's a mainstream Republican thing now. That's not some niche internet thing, you know. Tucker Carlson has been multiple times has shouted out the Libs of TikTok Twitter account. That language is coming from politicians now.
So yeah, like in regards to, like, you know, Tucker Carlson, you know, I hate that dude. You'll never catch me defending him. But you know, and like online, you know, stuff, you know, culture war definitely brought your brain. But you know, there's lots of idiots on, you know, but I don't see that. I don't really see that translating into like actual policy, really.
But we're talking about policies. The Don't Say Gay bill in Florida was a policy to prevent the discussion of these topics in a classroom.
Yeah. So in regards to that, you know, I've seen many arguments over what, you know, what the bill actually says, or what it does. It's there's just going to be they're going to say that it's or, you know, they say that it's that all it's doing is, you know, just not talking about it at all. Not like that they would be denying, you know, like your humanity, or if you were like trans or whatever, or
you can't legislate denying a person's humanity. The issue I have here is that it seems like you want them to pass a bill saying we're doing a genocide, or maybe not that extreme, but like something that overt. But much like with racism, it's a game of abstracts, you know? And it was the same in Nazi Germany. In 1933, well, actually, maybe by that far along, this was already the case. But when the persecution of Jews under Nazi Germany began, it didn't pass with them like just immediately saying, yeah, they're subhuman, we should kill them all, you know? You
Yeah.
mount a growing social argument against them, you know? The average person isn't going to get behind a genocide if the government just tells them to. You have to be given years of examples, and German Nazi propaganda was laden with hundreds, thousands of arguments made by propaganda ministers to explain why people should hate the Jews. And that's what we're getting right now. Conservative media is basically a nonstop 24/7 bullhorn decrying the threat that immigrants, queer people, minorities, whatever, pose to America. Now, they never say those people. It's always some ideology or some other group, you know. It's not black people, it's gangs and BLM. You know, it's not queer people, it's trans ideology. But the outcome of this is both a set of social prescriptions and a set of, you know, like legislative passes that end up targeting those groups anyway. And once you've done that enough, you've succeeded in building the argument for more drastic action. And that's what I'm concerned about. Well, I'm concerned about what's happening now, too. Just what's happening now on its own is sufficient for me to believe that, you know, the rights of these groups are being threatened, but it's a precursor to something more, as has happened before.
So what I'll say about that is, and the thing is about America is that, you know, I believe our institutions are strong. We're a country that's like no other. That's, you know, we're the, you know, I know this wouldn't really be a good argument, I guess, with you, but because, you know, I'm more, you know, I'm an American exceptionalist, but I will say that I think the institutions, our institutions that we have in this country are would prevent anything even remotely close to, you know, like anything like that, like, you know, like what happened in Germany.
Well, they
I just
suspended
don't.
democracy in Germany. Like, there were legal rights for minorities in Germany during the Weimar Republic. When the Nazis took
Yeah,
over, they just ignored them or legislated around them.
yeah, and I'm saying I think our institutions will would prevent that from from that itself ever happening. Um,
Well,
you know,
but if they take over, the institutions don't matter anymore, right? Because, like, that's the, like, if an anti-democratic party takes power with sufficient force, the institutions are no longer relevant in protecting them because they control those institutions.
yeah, but with America, you know, I think we have an exceptionally great system, you know, with all these checks and balances that I really can't see something like that ever happening here.
But the very last presidential election featured an attempted coup by the Republican Party. More than half of the party's elected officials openly backed the idea that Donald Trump was the real winner of the presidential election and that Joe Biden cheated in order to win. They maintained, and some of them still continue to maintain that delusion, and a lot of them also tacitly backed up a coup attempt to kill people who were, you know, verifying the election results. I mean, the last election, they attempted a coup.
So I'm gonna say, so yeah, I'll say yes. The election was definitely not stolen or anything. You know, Biden won. But the idea that there was like a whole like a whole effort by like the whole Republican Party to like actually overturn. So well, let me get into this a little more. So you know, Trump's came along, you know, and I'll definitely say that he's been a terrible, a net negative for the Republican Party and for conservatism. And so you know, he ends up being like the de facto leader of the Republican Party, and you know, and voters being the idiots that they are, you know, they end up worshiping Trump and everything. yeah, I'll admit, the voters in my party are stupid right now, but that they, like end up worshiping this uh, idiot guy. But so then you have so then you have Republican politicians that they have to, or a sizable amount they have to like come out and say that, because they're afraid of their base, which I wish the Republican establishment could deal with its base, kind of like what you think the Democrats do to leftists. That's what I wish Republicans would do to our base. But so what happens is, they end up being scared of their own base, and then they'll give these like they'll come out and say, yes, the election was stolen, Trump won, but and then Trump has this rally, and he gins up the whole idea of of the stolen election, and then he gets and then January 6th happened. So, but with that, my point here is the idea that it was like this whole intentional effort to storm the Capitol by like the whole Republican establishment, and that we were anywhere near, like that, the idea that we were anywhere near having like a coup happen or the election being overturned. I say that there's no way. Like, what happened was we had a bunch of really stupid people, and Trump does share some blame in riling them up, but
can't that be a precursor?
Huh?
I understand you have more faith in our institutions than I do, but you have to understand that the Weimar Republic was the wellspring of progressive democracy of Europe in its time. People didn't expect a fascist takeover there, too. It didn't require a majority of the population to consent to it, It just takes a group of people who don't believe in democracy having sufficient power. Now, I think you can safely say, as a product of the behavior we saw in 2020, Republicans don't believe in democracy. They just don't. For a political party to engage with the election as they did, they simply don't believe in democracy. It's not a value that they hold. It's just the framework they have to get through to do the things they want to do. No party that believes in democracy could act the way they did. So, with that being acknowledged, all it takes is for them to disrupt these institutions enough for them to institute an autocracy. And it wouldn't take that much, because to an extent, they've already succeeded. Remember Mitch McConnell refusing to hold a Senate vote on a Obama Supreme Court justice appointee, therefore effectively gifting a Supreme Court justice to Trump in 2016, even though by any imaginable constitutional right that responsibility was fallen to Obama? That right there was a defiance of the rules that we just don't really have a way to deal with, because a lot of our government kind of relies on gentlemen's agreements to function.
So, whenever you said, I just want to be clear, when you were talking about like Republicans don't believe in democracy, I'm assuming you're referring to like you're still referring to the politicians, like the establishment?
Yeah, mostly. I don't think they believe in democracy as like a function. It's not something they care about. There are plenty of examples of this blatant disregard for the political processes, which, to their credit, the Democrats don't have. Democrats are fastidiously attached to our institutions and our democracy. So this is a criticism that's pretty specific to the Republicans, I think. I think Republicans basically just want a monarchy. The politicians, I mean. The voters, too. I think they would be fine if they just had, I mean, think of the rhetoric that Trump stormed the party with, talking about running, running for a third term if he won the second one in 2020, you know? Talking about, or like endorsing the QAnon movement effectively in all but name, a movement which, you know, entails the belief that Donald Trump is some kind of anti-deep state warrior who will one day sweep aside the non-believers in a great purge. Like, these are deeply, deeply fascist values, and they're mainstream. I mean, that's the Republican Party. Why wouldn't they just take power if they got a chance? They already have the Supreme Court. They're going to have the Senate after 2022, and they might get the House as well. Republicans with House, Senate, presidential, and judicial control? What would stop them? Something's unconstitutional? Who cares? Texas got away with its blatantly unconstitutional anti-abortion bounty law because the Supreme Court just said, yeah, we'll look at it later. And now here they are about to overturn Roe v. Wade. There's essentially no limit to what they could do if they didn't care about people's, you know, legal rights. I don't think they do,
So I think you're kind of conflating a bunch of elements here. So, like, I strongly disagree with you about what you say about, like, the mainstream Republican establishment. That I think they're very much against, like, they're very much against this, like, Trumpism that's, you know, that's infected the party. Like, in rhetoric, you know, in public, they'll, you know, that it might not sound like that because, you know, they have to pander to the, you know, the dumb base. But
with respect, you know, that'll never sell with me, right? Like, this,
yeah,
this, like, they're only being fascists because they're the Trump surge wants it, but, like, privately they want to go back to being like neocons. I feel like I might be holding on to a lost era of your party, with respect.
Well, I don't think the I mean, yeah, I understand why you wouldn't, you know, buy it or anything, but I don't think the like the Republican establishment, they don't actually go along with the like the crazy Trumpist wing. They don't actually, you know, that you would, you know, that would be described as, you know, being anti-democratic.
But they do, though. They support him in every possible way. Maybe they privately seat at it, but I don't really care if they privately seat at it. If they fall in line when it comes to the votes, then that's all that really matters.
So wait, can you expound on that a little bit, like, on like the ways that they're significantly, like, siding with them?
Well, in terms of the voter base, Trump had a very high, like astronomically high approval rating from Republican voters. So your party's pretty much on board. In terms
I mean the establishment.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the voters here, right? Like, they vote for what they want. If Trump is what they want, that's what the party will do.
I was actually referring to the establishment. They're like the politicians and stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, in terms of the establishment, I mean, they back what Trump does. They backed the election coup fraud bullshit.
How did they do that?
Because I would say it felt like something like half of elected Republicans basically participated in this whole stolen election bullshit. And the other half were pretty much silent. There were very, very few Republicans who spoke up against what was being done. Like no, not McConnell, sorry. The guy who ran in 2012. Romney, thank you. Yeah. Romney did. You know, yeah, Cheney had his own a bit. McCain, yeah. There are a few, but, like, overwhelmingly, the Republican Party knows who's in charge. They'll support whatever leader gets them the votes they want, and they know that if they publicly speak out against Trump, that they'll be lambasted by the voters, because the voters like Trump. So I don't really care what they think, like, personally in their hearts, you know. I only care what they do. And if what they're doing is supporting a anti-democracy authoritarian, I mean, that's what I have to criticize them for, right?
So yeah, I don't think that what they're doing, like what they're actually doing, in any meaningful, significant way actually went along with that. So when you were talking about like half of them going full on and onto, so what exactly did you mean? Do you mean by that?
If you take a look at all these politicians and what they were doing during the 2020 election, a huge number of them were talking about how the election was stolen or repeating lies about.
Well, yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, my point is that's just all talk and rhetoric for the voters. That's
that. Wait, you can't. Wait, hold on. You can't excuse that.
No, I don't like it for sure.
But that's it. That's what I'm talking about. Like, this is directly what led to 1-6. Like, Republican politicians affirming the idea that the election was stolen was what led to the attack on the election. And that could have led to dead politicians. What's to keep Republicans from just stochastically encouraging the assassination of Democratic congresspeople and senators? They wouldn't even have to change their rhetoric. Just keep on saying that Democrats are cheating and stealing the election from God Emperor Trump. And then you have crazies with AR-15s, gun them down. And then, like, slowly but surely, you just sort of weaponize your lunatic voter base into an attack on the left.
So yeah, I don't think that like with the stuff that the majority of like Republicans were saying, when they're talking about the stolen election and stuff, I don't think that is responsible for like for 1-6 if that's what you were saying.
What do you think? Those people were explicitly there because they had been told the election was stolen.
Yeah,
you're not going to draw a link between all of the politicians they elected saying that and them believing that? Like, that's a pretty direct link right there.
No, I mean like the actual like storming, the actual like really bad stuff that happened. The actual bad actions that were being committed, not just like being at the rally or whatever. That just because Republicans were saying that just because there were like Republicans that were saying the election was stolen, all this crazy stuff, that itself is not responsible for actually trying to storm the Capitol. Like, they didn't. I don't see a.
Out of curiosity, do you think there's a relationship between German propagandists saying that Jews are parasites who like feast on the blood of German children and the Night of Broken Glass, where there was like a coordinated attack on Jewish-owned businesses and synagogues done in large part by civilians?
No, I get that. I don't think it's all that comparable to what happened, because
it sounds like you're like the problem is this conversation keeps coming back to disagreements we're having where it seems like you need a level of overt like bad behavior, like they're writing it in crayon or whatever, like you don't see the racism. Even with everything that happened with BLM, you don't see the transphobia because no one's passed a law saying they're literally second-class citizens. And sure, there were Republicans who like back Trump in every possible way all the time, but they don't mean it. And sure, they supported the election coup fraud, whatever. But when January 6th happened, that wasn't them. Like, I can never draw lines so clean and obvious that it can dispel all doubt, but I think I can dispel reasonable doubt. And these are like very clear indications of what is to come. What has already happened? I think it was in Michigan recently where Republicans got rid of all of the state electors who ratified Joe Biden as president in 2020, essentially saying like, next time, like, you better ratify the Republican no matter what the voters say. Like, a lot of them still haven't even dropped the election coup stuff. Trump can't keep his mouth shut about it. In an environment like this where they're so openly contemptuous of democracy, how can, like, why would I, like you'd have to sell me on your position pretty well here. It's an uphill battle, to say the least.
So what I say is, or what I'm saying is, I think this whole like the crazy Trump anti-democracy elements, what I'm saying is I don't think they're as that wing or that presence in the Republican Party is not as deep or as wide as you say it is.
Well, Trump has a massive approval rating in the Republican Party, so whatever he's doing clearly resonates with voters.
I'm talking about like the actual establishment.
But I only care what they do, not what they claim to like.
No, I know, and I'm talking about like that's still what I'm referring to. I think so. I'm not trying to like be mean here, but I think that your far left views kind of impair what you're seeing a little bit.
So if you acknowledge that no matter how they feel, their support is leading to them openly saying they agree with the stuff that Trump does when he opposes our democracy, like, isn't that enough? Like, if the politicians are like openly backing the anti-democratic stuff, that's all that matters to me in terms of condemning them for that behavior.
I don't. I just don't think that they were meaningfully. I don't think most Republicans were in any meaningful way, like greatly contributing to that. Really,
when the whole party backed Trump's lie about the election being stolen, that wasn't a meaningful contribution?
No, I don't think the whole. If we're still talking about like the
electors, the Republican Party was not thrown into disarray after Trump's loss. People either shut up or backed Trump. Like, there wasn't some big portion of the Republican Party that was freaking out, going like, no, he's lying, like this was a fair election. That just didn't happen.
I feel like I did see a lot of that happening.
From elected Republicans, like in the Congress and Senate?
Yeah.
Where?
I mean, like, what do you mean, like, where? Like,
this is a pretty consistent, like, push from the party. I'm not saying every single one of them completely fell in line, but like, the party fell in line. There are literally polls done today on how many Republican voters think the election was stolen, and a lot of them still do. You don't think any of that has to do with the hundreds of elected representatives who backed the lie that Trump pushed?
So, yeah, just to be clear, I'm still pretty much exclusively talking about the elected.
Yeah, I'm talking about them too. Yeah, I'm just saying, like, you don't think the hundreds of congressmen and senators had anything to do with that?
Well, no, I think the voters believing that stuff, that's what came first. That's the reason for why a lot of the elected officials said what they said, not the other way around.
Well, so if Trump is authoritarian and the voters listen to Trump and the elected representatives listen to the voters, doesn't that mean the elected representatives are listening to Trump?
So what I mean is the elected officials in the Republican Party, they, excuse me, one second. Sorry about that. So what they believe, sorry, my mind's going to a blank right now because I get nervous and stuff.
That's totally fine. I won't impugn you for that. It's just, all I care about is outcomes here. And the outcome is that elected Republican officials go along with the anti-authoritarian stuff. And if the voters want this, which they clearly do, judging by the approval ratings of Trump, Republican elected officials are going to have to keep playing into this in order to win. I think the reason for this is because a lot of Republican voters are just fascists. They don't want democracy. They want a strong man to rule over them and purge glorious America of the degenerates, which is exactly what the Republican Party is talking about right now. Tucker Carlson and a bunch of Republican officials are constantly fearmongering over immigration with, let's say, implied racial elements aplenty. You know, they're treating trans people basically the way the Jews were treated early on, as this effete intellectual, you know, hive of degenerates corrupting children. You know, like that was a huge component. Like the idea that they were infiltrating academia. That's the whole cultural Bolshevism conspiracy theory, which is mainstream now in the Republicans. It was literally a Nazi conspiracy theory, and it's mainstream now in the Republican Party. They call it cultural Marxism. So in this environment, you know, and the reason my language, I'm sorry for rambling, the reason I employ the language in that video, look, I don't think you're a fascist. I think you're permissive of it because you don't see it when you don't want to. I don't want anyone to get hurt, but we've seen this road play out many times in other countries and in our own. And it seems like past a certain point, violence is the inevitable resolution to political disagreements which, you know, ferment in anti-democratic environments. If that happens, I want to win. That's it. I don't want anything outside of that, because me winning means freedom for everybody. Them winning means a nightmare fascist autocracy. This is a humanitarian perspective from my end. Obviously, you and I don't agree on the preceding facts, but I hope you would agree, at least from what you know about history, you know, neither of us are historians, I imagine, that there is virtue in being cautious about these kinds of anti-democratic takeovers.
Yeah, I guess my big fundamental disagreement with you is that what you say is going on, like, with Republicans. I just don't think that it is, like, yeah.
Well, it seems like you don't like much of what the current Republican Party is doing. Why do you call yourself a Republican? Like, why not be a Dem? You know, neocons and Democrats don't disagree on that many issues, you know. Certainly not as much as the modern fascist Republicans do with Democrats.
So I'm, you know, I definitely would like, you know, to return to the 2004 GOP, but I disagree about the I'm still a conservative, so I very much disagree with the idea that the Democrat Party has anything for me.
Well, what do you want? What are you looking for?
Well, like I said, 2004 era Republican Party. I know that's still, you still would hate that too, but you know, I would like to I would at least like to return pre-Trump conservatism.
Well, sure, but like, what are you going for here? I mean, what political prescriptions are entailed in returning to tradition? You know, 2004. What do you want done?
So, well, for me, the things I like, my top things that I care about are foreign policy related. You know, I'm a neocon, so, you know, I want to go back to, I want, you know, stop, you know, not do isolationism, and you know, I think America needs to be strong and should.
Well, hold on. If I might, you know, as a warrior of Biden, if you're an opponent of isolationism, then I think Biden's done a good job with that. You know, obviously he's fully in favor of, you know, neoliberal, globalist, capitalist integration. He's certainly not a protectionist, right? And in terms of keeping our military strong, we have a record high military budget, you know? And he's projecting American strength across the world by supporting Ukraine against Russia.
So I'm I'm gonna have to strongly disagree because, first of all, the Afghanistan thing was so horrible to me. I'll never be able to support Biden. I we should have never left, in my opinion. Uh, we should have stayed. In regards to Ukraine, I think he hasn't been. I think he could have done a lot more to prevent uh, prevent Russia invading in the first place. I do appreciate him, supporting Ukraine now, definitely. But with protectionism, I think he kind of is a protectionist. Like, he's recently like saying stuff like "Buy American, hire American." The same stuff Trump said. Keeping all these tariffs in place.
Can I be honest
I
with you?
Sure.
I did not actually think you were a neocon. I don't think I've ever actually talked to a real one before. I'm actually kind of astonished. The idea of talking to a conservative who doesn't like the idea of promoting things that are American made because it inherently detracts from the nature of global capitalism. I feel like I'm talking to a caveman who's just been unfrozen from a block of ice.
Well, that's how I feel too. That's how I kind of feels the environment I'm in. I I'm I often I'll feel politically homeless, but I guess that's why I still identify as Republican, is because I want to shape it back into what it was. But yeah, I'm very much a neoconservative, Bush lover,
I get
Dick
that.
Cheney lover.
I do. Well, don't get me wrong. I hate that too. But
Yeah, I know.
I genuinely think, in fact, I'm almost certain you have much more in common politically with the Democrats today than the Republicans. You're just not, in my opinion, fully to terms with how bad the Republicans have gotten. Like, I mean, obviously you and I dislike Trump, but like bad, you know. Even, and don't get me wrong, Bush was a monster. To me, obviously you disagree and all, but,
Yeah.
he wasn't a fundamental threat to democracy in the way that Trump was. At least here, he was a bit of a threat to democracy elsewhere. But in terms of the regulation and functioning of democracy in the United States, Bush v. Gore in 2000 doesn't even hold a candle to what Trump has been up to. So in terms of like lesser evilism here, at least systems can survive. I don't know if our systems will survive a second Trump presidency. So, even if you and I disagree on this, maybe you can support me on one thing, which is a radical belief in defending democracy, a radical militant belief in defending democracy. And, maybe if that all gets settled, the Republicans, will go back to being neocons or something. The fascist coup doesn't work out for them.
Well, all I can say, after all, I do support spreading democracy to other nations. So I'm definitely a fan of democracy. The idea, also the idea that I would be more like closer to the Democrat Party. I'm very. That's like, I think that's a very interesting idea. Because I really can't see that at all. But that's would be an interesting thing to discuss.
It's a wacky world. I don't mean to rush you off. I'm way over time for the stream. I was just going to give it one more attempt in this boss, then pass out. So I'll probably end the convo here.
Okay.
But I'm happy
Sorry
to
if
see
I
you.
took too long.
Not at all. I'm happy to see you in chat moving forward.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on, and I'm glad I was able to discuss.
I enjoyed it as well. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Guys, I have never talked to I haven't talked to a neocon in so long. Holy shit. Yeah, rare species. Oh my god. Yeah. I'm glad that was in such good faith. Yeah. Like, obviously he was super nervous. But again, I'll never fault somebody for being nervous while talking to me. So the impression that I get from him is basically just like, yeah, I think he might live in the LDS time warp. Vosh, please explain why you didn't tear into him. So a couple of reasons. I'm happy to explain. First of all, there is never, ever any reason to tear into somebody when they're, like, evidently nervous. Like, why do that? It makes you look like such a dick, you know? There's no reason to. If I can get my points across better, like rhetorically, by tearing into somebody, then I will, but this is so not that situation. And he was super nice, which matters a lot to me in terms of how it sets the pacing of the debate. Second of all, don't get me wrong, I think that his political positions are, like, really, really bad, but a lot of what he said there felt to me like the conservative time bubble, like a boomer, but he's not boomer age, right? Like an inability to perceive how far the Republican Party has drifted towards, like, overt, full-on fascism and like a hope of things returning back to the good old days. And I don't think that's anywhere near as malicious as an active pursuit of the way things are now. Does that make any sense? Yeah, he's a Jeb supporter. Yeah. So, in terms of who he votes for, if he votes red, then consequentially the same outcomes. But in terms of, like, his perspective, you know, I feel like as an entity, as an individual, you know, morally, he's in a far better position than somebody who would come on here and just be like, you know, Trump, MAGA 2024, trans people, degenerates, groomers, blah, blah. But if he falls in line, it doesn't matter what his beliefs are. Should have asked him who he voted for in the last election. Oh, in a consequential sense, that is correct. All that matters is what he supports, what he votes for, you know. If he casts the vote Republican, then that's that, you know. I don't know. I don't really care who he voted for individually because I didn't want to have that convo, right? Like, I didn't want to have the convo like, well, why did you do this if you believe this? Because that's only really like an internal resolution for him, and it would come down to his, like, belief in the Republicans being better than Democrats. And I would rather just focus on, you know, like, what is happening right now. The most yikes thing was him saying anti-trans bills are a big deal. You know, do you think it's possible that, like, he just isn't that familiar with the extent of Republican messaging and its, like, proximity to genocide? Like, if you've never watched any Tucker Carlson, or maybe you just don't like him, but, like, you don't like him because he's, like, kind of an asshole or whatever, and someone's like, yeah, he's literally, like, doing great replacement theory stuff, maybe you'd be like, okay, come on. Like, really? But then you look at his show and, like, yeah, he does it every night. You know what I mean? So yeah, maybe it's something like that. Anyway, I got to talk to a NEOCON.